So now I would request Dr. T. Shri Priya ma'am, Professor EC Department, to introduce our guest of the day. Please, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Dr. Binsu J. Kailath, she is currently working as an associate professor in the Department of ECE in IIIT Design and Manufacturing Campus, Kanchipuram, Chennai. She holds her BTech degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering from the University of Calicut, Kerala, and has completed her MTech in Microelectronics and VLSI Design in the Department of Electrical Engineering in IIT Madras. She has done her PhD under the guideship of Dr. Gandhita Das Gupta, Professor, Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Madras, in the field of study of novel oxidation techniques for future MOS devices. Her areas of research includes design and develop neuromorphic circuits, design and develop a sigma delta modulator based ADC, switch capacitor circuit simulator, composite PFD based PLL, fabrication and semiconductor laboratory Punjab, high case SIC MIS capacitors, fabrication and sense IISc Bangalore, novel gate oxidation techniques for future MOS devices, effect of phosphorus doping on passivation of in silicon thin film transistors. She holds sponsored projects such as PLL ASIC design and testing, Sigma Delta ADC ASIC design and testing, as a principal investigator, which has been allotted by SMDP C2SD MeitY, Government of India. She holds a lot of publications, in which a few are she has got international publications of more than 30. She has attended international conferences more than 50, and she holds a national conference count of 2. The best journals in which her papers are published are Analog Integrated Circuits and Signal Processing, Applied Surface Science, IEEE Transactions on Device and Material Reliability, IEICI Electronics Express, IET Circuits, Devices and Systems, IETE Journal of Research, Microelectronics International, Semiconductor Science and Technology, Solid State Electronics, and Transactions of Electrochemical Society. She has guided research scholars, and she has set up many laboratories in IIIT D&M, and then she holds major responsibilities in IIIT D&M. A few to be mentioned are Dean Academics, Chairperson ICC, Professor in charge for Guest House, Curriculum Development Coordinator, Stream Coordinator, Coordinator for Coordinator for Design and PhD Admission, Coordinator for Designers Club, Coordinator for many conferences, Tier 1 conferences that is being conducted throughout the world. Yes, she holds several awards and accolades. A few are, she is a member of Board of Studies of IIIT D&M Kurnool, member of Board of Studies PSG College of Technology, Coimbatore, and Savitha Engineering College, Chennai. She is a reviewer of IEEE transactions on circuits and systems, II and microelectronics ILCBR. She holds a Best Paper Award in Indicon 2015, held in New Delhi in December 2015. She has been awarded Industry Ready Technology Award in the IEEE TechSem 2016, held at IIT Kharagpur from 27th September to 2nd October 2016. Yeah. DAAD Fellowship for the Postdoctoral Fellowship Research on 2011. She is a recipient of many scholarships and National Merit Scholarship during her schooling. She has also received a President's Guide Award for the President of from the President of India. Yes, we are very much happy and more privileged to welcome you to this session on behalf of Savitha Engineering College. The session is over to you, ma'am. Binsu, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your nice words.
Thank Thank you, ma'am.
I hope the slide is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah, good morning to all of you. Thank you for the nice introduction, ma'am. And as you have, gone through, my research was basically on fabrication of metal oxide semiconductor devices. And fortunately, during my MTech as well as in PhD, during PhD, I worked on experimental work. But when I joined IIIT DM Kanchipuram Business Institute in 2008, as we did not have experimental facilities to continue my work, I had to slightly shift towards circuit design. So basically, most of my students currently work on circuit design. And for the last 1 year, I have started working on neuromorphics, which is a very interesting area that has come up quite recently. And coming to my exposure in MEMS, whatever I know in MEMS is because of my professors who taught me the course in IIT Madras. And many of my colleagues worked in MEMS. When I was working on MOSFET, they were working on MEMS. So there some experimental part we were sharing when certain processes were undergone. And after that, I have taken the MEMS course for my students. So that is my exposure to MEMS. I just wanted to say that I don't have a strong research experience in MEMS, but my knowledge is basically which is transferred to me from my professors in IIT Madras. So as I hope this is like an introductory lecture, like overview of MEMS. So I would be dealing with a history of MEMS, an introduction of MEMS, and then a brief walkthrough through the different micromachining techniques. And then I want to specifically take at least one device. Say I'm taking accelerometer. Just want to give a flavor of how a MEMS can be designed, and MEMS design is not enough. You have to integrate always with a circuit. So how to integrate with a circuit and how the signal conditioning happens. So this is what I am planning to take in this session. So as we all know, the micro word comes from the famous IC technology, that is the VLSI technology, where the batch fabrication has revolutionized the entire electronics industry. And electromechanical is like an energy conversion. Even though the MEMS started, when we see the history, we can come to know that when it started, it was only between the transfer of energy between the two domains, that is electrical energy and mechanical energy. Whereas now we see MEMS everywhere. So because it was a name, like, it was given at the beginning of the technology, people are not, little hesitant to change the name. That is why its electromechanical word is not changed. But actually speaking, it is no longer just two domains. It has multiple domains. You have optics, you have bio, you have, different. So under the MEMS, you have different subcategories. So, and then systems, ultimately you have to integrate multiple systems. And just for the information, if at all some beginners are there, the dimensional ranges, if it is a surface micromachine structures, we will just go through what is the meaning of surface micromachine structure, which is the classic MEMS. The dimensions of the devices are ranging from 1 micrometer to 300 micrometer. And if it is a bulk micromachine structure, the dimensions of the devices are from 300 micrometer to 3 millimeter. And if it is a nano electromechanical system or NEMS, you have mostly the dimensions between 10 nano to 1 micro, where you will have RF MEMS devices as well as bio MEMS devices, basically falling into this category. I just want you to take to a little history. All of you might be familiar with the Feynman's physics lectures. He received the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1965. And in 1959, in an American Physical Society meeting, he has predicted that he wants to talk about the problem of manipulating and controlling things on a small scale. So he was thinking that in the year 2000, the people or the scientists who will live around in 2000 will definitely think, why is that this miniaturizing technology has not started, you know, much before? Why it has to wait at he would donate or he would offer $1,000 to the first guy who will be able to miniaturize an electric motor from a centimeter or meter dimension to a 1/64 of an inch cube. And then came up the technology, the Fairchild and Jack Kilby Physics, Texas Instruments. They invented the integrated circuit in 1958, and by the early 1960s, it was generally recognized as this is the way to make electronics smaller and cheaper. And then the Harvey Nathanson and William Newell, so they created the surface micro-machined resonant gate transistor 1965. And then after 95, it was MEMS didn't take off that much because people entirely concentrated on developing integrated circuit. And then the resonant gate transistor was poor on-chip reference frequency, and because the metal have very high temperature sensitivity and they did not have sharp resonance, so the quality factor of the filter made was very less. And then from the Stanford University in 1968, Robert Newcomb fabricated a surface micro-machine electromagnetic motor, but the performance was degraded as the dimensions were reduced. And then the material incompatibility with the Stanford's micro lab also was there, because the MEMS needed mechanical material, so they were actually not much familiarized with the properties of silicon. That it will revolutionize the entire mechanical sensor industry or actuator industry. That was not known that time that much. So entire focus was on integrated circuit. And in 1950s, silicon anisotropic etchants was discovered at Bell Labs. In later 1960s, Honeywell and Philips commercialized piezoresistive pressure sensor utilizing a silicon membrane formed by anisotropic etching. And from 60s to 70s, research at Stanford on implanted silicon pressure sensor and neural probes and wafer scale glass chromatograph, they were developed by multiple research group at Stanford. And in 1980, Kurt Peterson of IBM and ex-Stanford students, Henry Allen, Jim Kunti, Steve Terry, helped initiate Silicon Valley, silicon microsensor and microstructures industry. So in 1980s is what actually America started to really work on industrial, or commercializing MEMS structures. And another historical event is the development of silicon bulk micromachining. That is, the bulk of the silicon is etched to realize the mechanical structure, and it was discovered. And in 1990, silicon inkjet print has become a commodity. And when in 1980s, the next revolutionized technology, that is the surface micro-machine started up. Berkeley and Wisconsin University demonstrated the physical structural layers and oxide sacrificial layers. That was the rebirth of surface micromachining. And once surface micromachining was identified to be the ideal technology for the MEMS, then there was no look back for the MEMS, and it just grown from there. And in 1984, integration of polysilicon microstructures with NMOS electronics, because unless you couple with the circuitry, it cannot be, the signal cannot be processed. And in 1987, Berkeley and Bell Labs demonstrated polysilicon surface micromechanisms, and MEMS becomes the name in the US. As you know, microstructures is the name people use in Europe, but MEMS is the name used in US, and India also, we normally follow the name MEMS. And Analog Devices begins the accelerometer project. And I hope you all know that now the entire automobile industry, 90% of the automobile sensors of accelerometers come from Analog Devices. In 1988, Berkeley demonstrated electrostatic micromotors, stimulating major interest in Europe, Japan, and US. And Berkeley demonstrated the electrostatic cone drive. So now we just a brief, go through the different microstructures. This is a polysilicon microstructure. resonance structures. Cantilever beam type structure was developed by UC Berkeley in 1982. And then the polysilicon MEMS plus NMOS integration happened in 1983-84. This was published in IEDM by 1984. And you can see that there is a trans resistance amplifier, like a smaller version of an op-amp, and then capacitively driven and sensed 150 micrometer long polysilicon microbits. And then polysilicon micro electrostatic micro motor was developed. Why it's called electrostatic, I'll come to a little later, because a motor which works on electromagnetic principle on a macro scale becomes working on electrostatic principle when the dimensions are reduced. So that is why it's called electrostatic micromotor. So a self-aligned pin joint made it possible by conformal deposition of structural and sacrificial layers. You can see the stator and the rotor, structures. And this was Western Reserve University in 1990. And then COM drive resonators came up in IEDM in Washington DC. It came in 93. And this was the current accelerometer actually follow this COM drive structure. And this is the detailed diagram of an analog devices accelerometer. It is integrated with the bipolar and CMOS technology, and lateral structures with the interdigitated parallel plate sensing feedback capacitors, and then different devices came up. Berkeley and 4 or 5 level polysilicon level process. This level means that 4 or 5 levels of lithographic processes were involved in realizing this MEMS. And then in 1987, mechanical engineers moved towards MEMS, and they actually wanted to reproduce or recreate all mechanical sensors in using this technology. And the DARPA supported large projects at many US universities until 2002, and commercialization of inertial sensors and analog devices and Motorola, and from 91 onwards. And the company's revenue was hugely increased or multiplied. And then microfluidics started with the capillary electrophoresis in 1990, and for bio, this actually paved the way for MEMS entry into biotechnology. And then optical MEMS also started from 1998 to 2002. So again, I want to take MEMS actually go into nanotechnology, because whenever you talk about the bio MEMS, where you want to actually synthesize or analyze particles of nano or Armstrong dimensions. So Richard Feynman in 1959, he continued that it is interesting that it would be in principle possible for a physicist to synthesize any chemical substance that the chemist writes down. So the physicists say that this is the property I want, and the chemists say that, okay, this way you arrange the the atoms and then you get it. And that is why now you know that we have a technology known as ALD, which is atomic layer deposition, in which you can actually deposit the material layer by layer, and by varying the way in the sense the process conditions of deposition, you can actually vary the mechanical properties of the material. So this is what they have, these scientists have predicted in the 60s. And then Eric Detzler in 1980, a visionary promoting molecular engineering technology, had a paper at first MEMS workshop in 1987 looking into bioMEMS. And now why this nanotechnology is interesting. So recently, you know that people have started working on, carbon nanotubes, nanowires, quantum dots, molecular motors, and AFM, atomic force microscopic tip, which is in atomic dimension. All these were used for synthesizing nanostructures, which can actually, which will actually give resolution in huge order for the device. Say, if you want to sense or actuate, you can sense the excitation, which is of nano dimension, and similarly you get a response which is also of the nano dimension. So this way it actually paved the way for RF MEMS and bio MEMS. And just So this synthetic processes promise to create new batch fabrication technology, and planar lithography is reaching the nano regime. State of the art is 50 nanometer lines per space. Spatial lithography has reached 7 nanometer. New computational devices have come up, neural quantum computing. So all these actually, the research that is progressed in the electronics for miniaturization actually help the MEMS also, because actually even though MEMS didn't pick up initially, after 1980s or 87, MEMS actually picked up. Now the research actually goes hand in hand, that any development that comes in electronics is immediately incorporated into the MEMS, and any MEMS, now the world is of IoT, where you need infinite number of sensors and signal conditioning simultaneously. So without these MEMS or nano sensors, one cannot realize this IoT type of sensors to sense very minute or very nanoscale excitations. And this is just an example of a 1 gigahertz NEMS resonator, a nano device, because we were just talking about the NEMS. I'm just showing this. This is from UC Berkeley in 2003. And this is like a silicon double enter tuning fork with width, length, etc. Interconnect parasitic elements are critical, need nearby electronics, and they were using FinFET and SOI process for interconnecting the circuitry. And then this was a biomedical device for a DNA detection developed by MIT in 2007. This is ultra fast and ultra sensitive dielectric DNA detection, and applications to functional genomics, who are working on genomics or proteomics chips, as well as an exploration of nano gap DNA. So I hope you can see that the yellow color is one polysilicon layer, the green color is also a polysilicon layer, the blue is the silicon over silicon. You have deposited an insulator silicon nitride, and there is a nano gap. This is a magnified view of the nano gap that comes here. The blue color, structure on the left side actually represents the nanofluidic network for DNA trapping. You can see that on the two sides you have an array of electrodes and inlet for the nanofluid, and then the DNA particle will get trapped in that nano gap, and based on that the detection happens. And this is some diagram of this DNA, the same group. You can in the scanning electron microscopic diagram, in which you can actually sense what is the measurement of each of the structures. And then the MEMS in accelerometers, gyroscope, all these came up. This is a diagram of analog devices accelerometer. Now you see in aeroplane or in any autonomous vehicle or automobile, you have infinite number of sensors at every part. And then you have optical devices also, MEMS in sensing and encoders. So this is just a diagram I copied. So then dust jet printer, this was a revolutionized invention, that the MEMS was possible with a very high resolution printing technology. And now in every printers, dust jet printers, this technique is being used. And then this is an example of a micro optical components at Bell Labs. This is like a symbolic diagram. And then this is a micro mirror for fiber switching. This also developed at Bell Labs for color mirrors. And then comes a bio-MEMS sensor. This is a cantilever-based structure. You can see that there is an anchor. The blue color represents the cantilever. The blue bottom represents the anchor. Over that there is a sensing film, and over that the atoms or the the particle which is helping in sensing, that comes and fixed on that. So the cantilever structure with antigen, the change in mass happens when these particles actually get deposited onto the cantilever beam. So there is deflection due to repulsive forces, and the sensing can be done using either optical sensing or capacitive sensing, or like a resonant frequency, because it is vibrating, and the frequency of vibration will actually change when this particle reside, because the mass actually move by few nanograms or micrograms. That actually will change. The resonating is done based on that. Now I just want to give a little flavor of scaling. So this is the it's a huge diagram showing from 10 power 20 meter, the distance up to the light years, or the extraterrestrial, world. From there, if you come to the human length of the order of 1 or 1.2 meter, and then human hair, that is 10 power minus 4 meter, that is 100 micro, and then we come to the nano or micro devices. So these two black strip actually come to the devices that are man-made but using the micro machining technology. These are man-made devices using the conventional technology that is of the order of dimension from millimeters to few meters, whereas the devices which are created from micro to nano dimensions, they are also man-made, but they are created using the micro machining technology. Now, I just want to give you a flavor of scaling, because MEMS is a micro mechanism. So we should understand what is the implication of scaling. So normal objects which we visually see, they are macro objects. Very small objects which we cannot see directly, they are called micro objects. And the principles that are effective at macro scale become insignificant at micro level. Say, for example, gravitational forces dominate on an astronomical scale, where the mass is so huge, but it becomes negligible when mass of objects are less. This I just want to highlight this. So this is what a normal electric motor works on electromagnetic force, but a micro motor uses electrostatic force instead of the magnetic field, because of the structure and the variation of the distance between the stator and the rotor. And the time scale from conception to utilization, Volta and Ampere developed the basic concept of electricity, and it took around 100 years to build the generators and motors by Tesla and Edison. Whereas, in contrast, the micro comb drive motor described in the 1989 is used in the automobiles as an airbag sensor within 12 years. So now the life to shelf, once the design comes, a concept comes, the lifetime to reach the actual working product to be able to be sold to the market is just 10 years now, because of the advancement of this technology. I mean the scaling principle. Now, as the scale or size of a system changes by orders of magnitude, the system will behave differently. I just want to take one example. Say a glass of water about 5 centimeters. Say assume that in a glass of water you have water of height 5 centimeter. If you pour onto a table, it runs off the edge of the table without any problem. Now you assume if the height of the water is only 0.05 or 0.5 millimeter. Now upon pouring, the surface tension pulls the water into a drop and it sticks to the table. Even if you tilt the table, it is difficult to flow. It will just get sticked onto the table. Now, water and table is the same, but changing the water scale size makes it behave very differently. Now you imagine the size of the glass, the water is only 0.0005 centimeter. That means in the micron level. That is 5 micron. Upon pouring, drop will not even reach the table. Air current will carry it away. So you have a glass containing 5 micrometer of water height, and you just pour it. That drop even won't reach the table. It will just fly away with the air. So the behavior of the water is dramatically different because of its size. So this scale factors all dimensions of object if you change by S. Say for example, because to realize any mechanical structure, you need length, width, and height. For cantilever beam, you have a length, you have a width, and you have a height. So if you see in independent houses, you can see the the carports. A carport without a supporting pillar is an example of a huge mechanical structure of cantilever beam. The same mechanical structure miniaturized into micron dimension is what the cantilever that imagine the length, width, and height changes by around 1 by 100. The volume actually decreases by 1 by 100 cube, that is S2. Now force, you have multiple types of force. You have one force due to surface tension, force due to electrostatic, force due to magnetization, force due to gravitation. So you have certain formulae for each, like distance or the dimension between them, dimension between the charge reduces, dimension between the north pole and south pole changes, dimension between two objects decreases, etc. So how the force decreases. So based on the fundamental formulae of the force, the force due to surface tension reduces as 1 by S, electrostatic 1 by S square, and magnetic 1, I mean, S is 1 by 100 or 1 by whatever is the value of the dimension that you reduce, which means that if from 1 millimeter, if you reduce to 0.1 millimeter, it is reduced by 1 by 10. That is the meaning. Gravitational, it is reducing as S power 4. So if size decreases from 1 meter to 1 millimeter, each of these forces reduces by 1 by 1000, surface tension force reduces by 1 by 1000, electrostatic force reduces by 1 by 1000 square, magnetic force reduces by 1 by 1000 cube, and gravitational force reduces by 1 by 1004. That is why we don't experience the force of gravitation as the object magnitude is less. Changing the size of a mechanical system changes which forces are important. So 2 meter man to a 2 millimeter bug, the weight is 1 by 1000 cube, and the surface tension is 1 by 1000 square. Assuming in a rectangular foot, the bug can walk on water, but the human cannot walk because of this principle of scaling, that if the dimensions are reduced from a huge scale to a small scale, the forces that are applicable on a huge scale is no more applicable on a shorter scale. So if you just example as work done, which is force into distance, each one scales by this. So we can drop an ant, but not an elephant. So this is based on this principle. So I have just cited few examples, say acceleration for FST by FV increases a while, for FM is a constant and FG decreases. So transit time to T to move from a point A to BX is half AT square. So if you substitute the values of each of the dimension reduction, how much it is, the total scaling effect is actually this S power 1.5 by S power 1, S power 0.5, S power 0. So it is what is important. Why I have taken this example is that it is very important to understand that whichever be the physics behind a macro system, when you apply to a micro system, the effective forces that are applicable in that environment or in the certain boundary conditions might be different. An electromagnetic system at a macro level will be converted to an electrostatic system when it becomes a micro level. So it is very, when somebody who is interested to work on MEMS should always understand the basic physics or science behind each of these structures when these devices are miniaturized. So it is important to note that upon scaling of dimensions equally, the different physical parameters like force, acceleration, time, etc. do not vary at the same scale. It depends on the physical principles that govern the system and the relations or equations that given each system and its parameters. So I just, because this is an introductory lecture, I just want to say you that traditionally there are three technology. This is from the Tsai Ran Zhu book, that micro manufacturing, the bulk micromachining, surface micromachining, and the Liga process. These are the fundamental three technologies that are used to realize the MEMS device. I hope you all know that silicon has been identified as the major material used for MEMS, but there are other materials like lead, there are polymers, there are polycrystalline silicon, there are glass, there are quartz. Based on the property that you need piezoresistive material means you can use silicon. Piezoelectric material means you should use quartz. If you want an optical device, you may need to use glass or quartz. And if you want RF MEMS, you may need to use metals, because metals resonant frequency are much higher than silicon or polysilicon beams. And if it is bio-MEMS, you should use biocompatible materials. So there are different materials for MEMS, but basically silicon is the most predominant material. Irrespective of the material, most of the technology that are realized for realizing the MEMS structures actually come up from or borrowed from the VLSI technology. So that is why people or the designers, they don't want to replace the entire VLSI lab for another material. So to the extent possible, they always try to realize the MEM structures with some silicon inside that. But if that is not possible, they may use some other material. But in most of the cases, the basic material or the structural initial the substrate material normally is silicon. Surface micromachining normally are realized using polycrystalline silicon as the structure which is used to sense or actuate the mechanical mechanism. Whereas in bio, it will be like the antigen or the porous silicon or different type of material. Basically, we could say that most of the technology that are applicable for silicon electronics are also applicable for MEMS, but a few differences are there. That is what we are citing here. So bulk micromachining technique involves creating 3D components by removing materials from thick substrates using primarily etching method. So etching is possible by dry etching or wet etching, and the substrate that are normally used for bulk micromachining are silicon carbide, gallium arsenide, or special polymers. Gallium arsenide is basically used when very high speed devices are required. And wet etching use chemical solvent, so you have photoprotective resist, and you have a substrate and become like this. So the dry etching uses plasma to remove materials at the location of the substrate. And as I said, silicon has different planes, and each of the plane, the number of atoms in each of the plane are different. So the distance between the parallel planes in each of these orientations are different. Basically, the mechanical properties also are different. So the because of the number of atoms arranged in each of the planes are different, and the silicon is anisotropic in nature. So the wet etching of silicon actually contributes some angle. You can't get exactly vertical groove in a silicon if you do with chemical etching. If you do with dry etching, wet chemical etching, if you do with the dry etching using reactive ion etching or plasma etching, it is possible to create vertical groove structures. And anisotropic etching is easier to control of the etched shape, but disadvantages, their etching rate is 1 micrometer, it is temperature limited, and elevated temperatures, but then etch rate will be uncontrollable. So the wet etchant normally used are HNA, the KOH, potassium hydroxide, EDP, ethylene diamine, pyactocol, then TMAH. So most etchants are used with 1 by 1. So these are in silicon 100, what is the etchant, what is the etch rate. These are all standard data available in the literature, either as in textbook form or in paper. The researchers normally have to refer this and standardize at their own respective lab before actually starting the process. And there are a selectivity ratio, that etching rate of silicon and etching rate of the material used by the same etchant. That is why sometimes it happens that a particular material bought from a company or a vendor, and you standardize the etchant, and next time you get the the chemical from a different vendor, you may have to again standardize it, because the purity of the material, the molarity of the material, etc., may vary from vendor to vendor. So these are like, even though there is a standard data, as a designer or as a researcher, one has to always standardize or calibrate these processes before actually realizing the structure. And this is like, some diagram in which silicon dioxide or silicon nitride are used as the mask, and the silicon substrate is used by, etched. And this is some problem which is shown, like under etching and undercutting happens when the etching happens. So one has to prevent such type of behavior or characteristics happen. So people use for etch stop technique. This is like an electrochemical etch stop technique, where you will have a reaction of etching happening, but then you will have another material on which etching cannot happen. So that layer will act as an etch stop layer. Here you can see that the red color etching penetrates into the p-type silicon, but behind that there is an n-type layer. So when it reaches the the n-type, the etching actually will stop. So you can create, or you can have a different doping concentration. There also the etching will stop. So there are different techniques by which people can actually stop the wet etching. Now coming to dry etching, there are multiple techniques: ion etching, plasma etching, reactive ion etching. So here, like, as plasma is neutral ionized gas carrying a large number of free electrons, and positively charged ions. They will be bombarded onto the material where etching has to happen. There will be a protective layer which will protect the area which should not be etched. So the unprotected area will get etched. So this is like a symbolic diagram in which you can see that you have a side wall and these ions are bombarded onto this. So this mask, which is gray color thick mask, actually protect the area there. Even though the ion bombards, the ion actually will sit inside the mask area. It will not go to the etching surface. Whereas the area which is unprotected get etched by the RF plasma. And then comes deep reactive ion etching, where the dimensions are relatively very narrow. If you want to get nano type dimensions, one has to go for deep reactive ion etching, and you will get very fine nanostructures possible with this technique. And then yeah, the principle is like the MEM structures with aspect ratio of around 30. It is possible to create virtually vertical walls of theta plus or minus 2 degrees for several years. DRIE is capable of doing that. You can actually get vertical comb layers using DRIE. And then quite recently, the DRIE for better sidewall protecting material, silicon substrate with A by P over 100 was at a depth of 300 micrometer. So normally LIGA only will be capable of realizing this type of vertical structures, but with the DRIE, because it is deep etching, you can actually create aspect ratio for, say, polymer, it creates 30:1, photoresist it creates 100:1, and silicon dioxide 200:1. So you can create aspect ratio much better. And if you compare the bulk micromachining techniques wet versus dry, you have a different properties like directionality, masking material to be etched, cleanliness, operational parameters, control of etch rate. So these are different parameters one can look at. The other technique that is used is surface micromachining, where actually you create the structures by on a structural layer that is deposited onto the substrate material. So this is added materials may not be the same as the substrate material. It gives the flexibility of using different material. It can be as thick as 2 to 5 micrometer thick or as high as 5 to 20 micrometer. There is a little waste of substrate material, whereas in bulk micromachining, bulk of the silicon is actually removed to realize the mechanical structure. Here, that is not the case. And deposition processes are commonly used methods are expensive. You know, you need sophisticated techniques and instruments or equipment to realize these structures. This is just an example of a cantilever beam realized using surface micromachining. Starting the at the topmost constraint glass is sacrificial. This I mean is used just beneath that is a opening. The PSD is removed, and all over the other PSG and layer fixed onto the silicon substrate as an anchor, and then you have a cantilever beam. This is a simple example of how we realize a surface micromachine device. And the most commonly used sacrificial layer materials are phosphosilicate glass, silicon dioxide, or boron phosphosilicate glass. And etching process, there is some formula 1:1 HFH2O or 1:1 HClH2O, and with the combination of deionized water. And for you have, as I said before, if it is a CVD, chemical vapor deposition, ground silicon dioxide, if it is densified at 1050 centigrade for 30 minutes, you have a lateral etch rate of 0.6 micrometer per minute. Whereas if it is an ion implanted silicon dioxide, you may have a 0.83 micrometer per minute. If it is phosphosilicate glass, PSG, you will have 1.13 micrometer. If it is BPSG, boron phosphosilicate glass, you may have 4.16. So based on the material that you use and based on the technology or the technique by which these materials are deposited, the etch rate may differ. So the designer has to actually look into these standard data as well as optimize the data with respect to their own labs. And coming to some problems that are encountered while depositing, while realizing the surface micromachine devices, you have peeling off can happen if the addition between the material that is deposited onto the substrate is not good. the beam can get peeled off, and there can be a severing because some other material or an air gap or some other material can get trapped inside this, and that can create by shear stress. And then interfacial stresses due to mismatch of this coefficient of temperature, that is CTE. Say you see the deposition may be happening at 1000 degrees centigrade, and the coefficient of thermal expansion of silicon and silicon dioxide are different, which means that when the temperature is reduced from 1000 to 20 degrees centigrade, the contraction that happens in silicon will not be same as the contraction that happen in silicon dioxide, which means that there will be a bending happening due to this contraction after oxidation at room temperature. So this also may create some problem in surface micromachine devices. The stiction may happen. Stiction is like when you release the beam by removing the phosphosilicate glass under the or the sacrificial layer under the polysilicon beam or the structural layer. The beam can get sticked onto the surface. Normally this is due to poor drying, and drying means some water particle or some chemical during the chemical etching process or during the cleaning process will get stuck inside. Then that may cause this stiction. So once stictions take place, there is little chance to separate the parts again. So this used to van der Waals forces. So because this structure get collapsed, this will become unusable. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you can proceed now.
Yes, yeah, because I saw a message that my connection has some problem. That is why. Okay. So in the last technique that is used for realizing the MEM structure is the LIGA, lithography, electroforming, molding. This is actually a German acronym, and this is basically used to create huge aspect ratio mechanical structures in miniaturized form. This was Karlsruhe Nuclear Research Center, and this is radically different from silicon base. This is like a molding process. A mechanical molding process is actually involved in the LIGA. There is no restriction on using for LIGA, and it is it can be used for producing the large. Only disadvantage is that you need to have a synchrotron radiation because it has to go through a deep layer. So deep X-ray lithography provided by synchrotron radiation, and then photoresist with the desired patterns. You should have electroplating of metal or metals, and you create the form, and then you create the original mold. So this is a detailed diagram. Assume that the hollow cube, the desired product is like a tube. At the center you have a hollow. It's a rectangular hollow tube. So this is assume this is what on micron scale, or say 30 micrometer, 100 micrometer, such structure is to be realized. So then what is to be used is there should be a a gold plated region. This gold is required because gold is the best material for blocking the X-ray. Even though it is expensive, that is to be used. The other area, the white area, is like the transparent. Wherever the X-ray has to fall, there it will be transparent. Other area will be blocking the X-ray. And then the thick photoresist. This is PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, that is used as the photoresist. And then whichever area is protected, the X-ray will not fall. The X-ray will fall in this, and that will get removed in the during the developing process. And then you can by electro deposition or something, you can actually put metal inside this gap, and then you remove the outer two layers, you get the substrate. So over the substrate you get the metal tube. So this is how you actually develop the LIGA. So the materials for LIGA process, the substrate in LIGA process must be electrically conductive to facilitate subsequent electroplating. Metals such as steel, copper, titanium, nickel are used. Silicon with thin titanium or silver chrome top layer, or glass with thin metal layers. Photoresist basically must be sensitive to X-ray radiation, and there are different materials used here, and the properties of each of these materials are also given. So people who work in this area should there are very few labs working in India on LIGA, because in India whether it is ISC or IIT Bombay or IIT Madras, people basically work on bulk or surface micromachining only. we have not, been into the Liga process so far, to the best of my knowledge. And for the electroplating, this is the fundamental wet electrochemical. You have an anode, you have a cathode, and you have an electrolyte. You pass the electricity, either a DC or a AC superimposed with the DC. You will have a uniform movement of ions, and you get deposition. So it is just that. So the summary of micromachining: bulk micromachining is the least expensive for microstructures with a simple geometry, but it is limited to low aspect ratio. Surface micromachining, you need to have deposition techniques for for depositing the structural layers, and you need multiple layers of lithography. And etching of sacrificial layers is very, very complex, where stiction, warping, collapse, all those things happen. So you should be very, very careful, and process is tedious and expensive, and interfacial stress and friction may happen. So that is the issue with surface micromachining. Liga process most expensive with the initial capital cost. Synchrotron radiation facility is there, but advantages are virtually unlimited aspect ratio. Irrespective of silicon, any material can be used. So these are, so based on the requirement of the structure that is to be realized, people can actually go for any of these devices for realizing the MEMS. So I just want to just to go through the accelerometer, just because I wanted to give you a flavor of how a mechanical structure is realized, and how we can signal condition it. So a steady state dynamic performance of accelerometer, bulk or surface micromachine. So as all types of accelerometers are realized by some kind of suspended mass system, the equations are corresponding to spring mass damper system. So all of you, whoever have studied control system, are familiar with this system, where you have a suspended structure. You have a mass, and that will give a force. So the steady state condition is that restoring force will balance the inertial force, that is F is equal to ma is equal to kx. So if you want to find the spring constant of the system, it is just ma divided by x, and the sensitivity is x divided by a. And the value of k, the spring constant of the system, will actually depend upon the Young's modulus of the beam, and the dimensions, the width, height, length of the beam. And the displacement x, how much the beam can actually vary, will depend upon it's a measure of the sensitivity. Higher the mass will result in higher sensitivity, and higher spring constant make it stiff and results in lower sensitivity. So this is just a diagram which we developed. When I was working in IIT Madras, that group, the MEMS group, had developed this system. So this is three structures are there, in which the dimensions of the beam. You can see that the accelerometer is made up of type of a structure with some hollow holes inside. So the mass of the system can vary. So here you can see 9 holes are there. This is symbolic diagram. Here you have 4 holes. So the mass of each of this will be different. And the length of the beam, you can see that this is 1.15, whereas the second one is 0.6 millimeter only. And the size of the structure, the accelerometer vibrating structure is 1 millimeter here, whereas here it is only 0.5 millimeter. So the UZ2 and UZ3 are identical, except that one is higher than length is higher, the other one mass is higher. So this is the UZ3 structure. So when in ANSYS, when you simulate the deflection in X versus acceleration, you get 3 different characteristics, that the UZ1 is showing maximum deflection. So then if you have, I'll just go through that. This is because it's a second order system, you have to go with the fundamental differential equation of this and with the external force applied, where B is the damping coefficient and K is the spring constant, converting into S domain and equating it with the standard S domain second order equation. You get the steady state condition, resonant frequency, the quality factor, and the damping ratio. All these things you can actually find from the values of B, M, and K. And B, M, and K can be developed based on the dimensions of the B. So, and the sensitivity is measured by using X by A. Now, if you relate an electrical and mechanical system, the mass M, L, damping B, resistance, spring constant K, C, and the resonant frequency is root of K by M or root 1 by LC, and quality factor omega naught M by B or omega naught L by R. So you can actually compare, people who are from electrical background can easily compare this mechanical system based on the resonance behavior. And if you see the critically damped system will reach the steady state the faster with the theta equal to 1, whereas when you have theta less than 1 or greater than 1, you will have underdamped or overdamped situation. So based on that, by using simulation, you can actually optimize the values of the length of the beam and the mass. So if this U is at one structure, when it was a mass plate thickness of 10 micrometer, having a mass of 2.33 10 power minus 8 kilogram, and spring constant value 4997 Newton per meter, and F, the resonant frequency 7.37 kilohertz. So this particular structure resulted in this. Whereas the second structure with 0.6 beam length created a mass of 0.63 10 power minus 8 kilogram, 351.82 and resonant frequency length of the beam was 1.15 and the mass was much less, I mean 0.52. Mass is 0.6, frequency 14.17. So by which I want to say that by changing the beam length, height, width, as well as the structural dimension of the structure, we can actually come up with the different values of resonant frequency required for different purposes. So you can imagine that an accelerometer which is fixed on an auto rickshaw will not be same as that is required in an auto bike. I mean in a bike will not be same as in an aeroplane, because the vibration of the devices are different. So which means that we should be able to actually devise or design different types of accelerometer structures based on the requirement. So this is like a, the structure, a bulk micro-machined accelerometer structure based on differential capacitance sensing on force balanced operation. I'll just briefly say that also. So this is like a glass plate is there on both sides, and you have two electrodes, and this seismic mass, which is also having conducting layer, will move up and down between the this is just a symbolic diagram of that. Now we come to the accelerometer ADXL. This is a cone drive structure. Is the more representing the fixed beams. So the two fixed beams are at the two sides of the movable beam. So when this mass actually moves left to right, the capacity increases, C2 increases. Why? Because the gap between them, eventual capacitance sensing. Why? Because if no sensing applied, the capacitance should be 0. That is why. So this is just a diagram of that. This is a specification. Capacitance is 0.069 picofarad. This is the ADXL 50 parameters. Effective spring constant is for 1.98. Frequency 17.7 kilohertz. Displacement caused by 1g. Okay. So acceleration in all these accelerometers, we need to specify with respect to acceleration due to gravity. So when you say 1g, it means that 9.8 meter per second square. You know that that is the acceleration due to gravity. Anywhere you see accelerometer, always the specification of acceleration will be mentioned in terms of the acceleration due to gravity. So at an acceleration due to gravity, that is when an acceleration of 9.8 meter per second square is applied, the displacement cost is 0.793 nanometer. And the change in capacitance is 62 into 10 power minus 6 picofarad for 1g acceleration. And the total change in capacitance is 3 femtofarad if you apply 50g. It is not gram, it is 50g of acceleration. And on-chip electronics is a must. So now this is what I just want to give you a flavor how this on-chip and accelerometer comes together. So this is a diagram, copied from the textbook, or I think a journal paper. So this is like, you can see that the CS and CR represents two capacitors between the movable plate. This is a movable plate fixed at two anchors, and this is the fixed plate A and B of the accelerometer, and you apply a voltage, differential voltage, in the sense you apply plus VI sin omega t and minus VI sin omega t, so that when no movement or no deflection of the movable plate is there, that the capacitance will be exactly the same. So that is the meaning of differential capacitance sensing. So to measure the displacement of movable plate, CP, CP is the parasitic capacitance, CI is the input capacitance of the buffer amplifier. This is a MOSFET based buffer amplifier. You have a differential pair, so that is the input capacitance. And plus Vm and minus Vm sin omega t are applied to the plates. And when CR equal to CS, the input to the buffer amplifier is 0. When CS and CR are different due to the deflection, there will be a, you can solve it by that zero input current, because this is an op-amp, it draws zero input current. So assuming the KCL condition, Kirchhoff's current law, we can actually write KCL equation, and then you can find out what is the value of VI created at the input and CR, and you find a normalized capacitance when no deflection is there, what is the value of CS and CR, and then CS and CR can be expressed as C0 into D by D plus S and C0 into D by D minus X, and that you do some manipulation, you actually get that VI equal to 2 C0 X by D, C0 plus CI plus CP into 1 minus X by D the whole square, where X is the deflection cost of the plate and the fixed plate. Now we see that this expression actually depends on the CI and CP, which is the input and parasitic capacitance, which is bad. No measurement should depend upon the internal condition. So to remove that, people actually use their feedback. So this is an amplifier with a feedback. Now once you do that, the equation actually varies. Again, you go through the same op-amp conditions. You see that because of the presence of the high gain amplifier here, AI, which is an inverting in nature, and there is a feedback, this feedback voltage will actually result in a cancellation of AI. So now the V0 value will have only C0 and CFB, that is the feedback capacitance. There is no CI and CP. The CI and CP will get vanished, not by neglecting, but because of the presence of this huge AI at the denominator. The value of CI and CP will get eliminated. So the value of V0, the output will become depending only on the normal capacitance and the feedback capacitance. Now this opposite excitation with the capacitive feedback, this if you replace this CP and CI, the accuracy and the elimination of CP and CI from the expression will improve the accuracy and stability. So that is that is done by a force balanced principle, that is by CFB is varied by, is replaced by an RFB, a resistor, and then if you apply a superimpose a DC along with an AC, here also a DC along with an AC, this demodulator acts the AC and only DC is fed back here, that DC will be applied here, so that the movement of this will be balanced by the DC that is fed back, and that DC is a effect of the difference between these two. So what happens here is that there is an electrostatic force due to the movement of the movable plate converted to an equivalent capacitance change here, a voltage here. That voltage, the AC part alone is, the DC part alone is taken and is fed back, and the same voltage is used to compensate the mechanical force. So this electrostatic force and compensation with the mechanical force, that is why it's called force balanced sensing. So demodulator is between buffer and amplifier to derive the DC. As VFB changes the electrostatic force between the electrodes, the feedback is electromechanical in nature, and the capacitance is not measured electrically but on electromechanical operation, and that is why this is called force balanced principle. And if you continue with the same procedure of writing the the equation, finally you get X by D VI sin omega t. Movable plate moves up and down, and So with the open loop gain of this amplifier A0 demodulator A1 being very, very large, you get a perfect operation. So positive DC voltage at the central plate differentiate the electrostatic force. Net electrostatic force moved by the capacitor is negative. So the displacement, it is this technique is referred to as force balance sensing technique. In a sense, the measurement is made through capacitive sensing. So in parallel plate capacitor, the work done or energy stored is F into D, which is half Q into V. You equate these two fundamental equations, you get epsilon 0 epsilon r a v square, and then you get the electrostatic force, and this force will be used in the differential equation to find the displacement x. So this is just for anyone who wants to work in or who are already working in MEMS. Just wanted to show after realizing the MEMS structure, unless it is integrated with the circuits or electronics, you cannot develop the system. So after integrating with the system, how you actually come up with the force equation, and once the force equation is done, just put up in the second order differential equation or the S domain equation, and based on the dimension and spring constant, you can find the values of K, M, etc., and then you can solve it. So with that, I come to the end of the discussion. So if you have any questions, this is the time for that. You may please ask any questions. I think I was very fast because I knew that I had to finish by 12:45.
Yeah, okay, ma'am, but it was really useful and you were able to get a lot of information through your session, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. That was really a wonderful, informative session, and we convey our heartfelt thanks to you for sharing your valuable knowledge with us. Hope we can now move to the question and answer session, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Actually, we have launched a poll question before the session to know about the participants' interest, whether they expect it as an interactive session or to be a grading assessment session. Their answer was they need some interactive and lively session. So can we now have such an interactive session, ma'am?
Yeah, yes, yes. So what should I do now? I mean,
yes, ma'am. We'll allow.
should
We'll
I
ask the
stop the
participants
sharing?
let it be, ma'am. Let the sharing be there. Or would you like to switch on your video?
Okay. It's okay, no problem. No, not request.
Nancy, we have got a question from
Okay,
Kaustubh Kumar Shukla. So I'm just unmuting him.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes. Shukla sir, you can ask your question, sir.
Yeah, yes,
Please.
ma'am. Ma'am, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Ma'am, actually, I am doing my research work in MEMS, and especially I am doing my research work in micro cantilever. So I have studied some paper, ma'am, but whatever the paper or textbook or online material I have found, actually only they have discussed about dimensional shapes, material changes. So can you please suggest me, ma'am, is there any further possibilities using micro cantilever we can use as a gas sensor or health monitoring? Any things can you please suggest me, ma'am?
Yeah, there is a very beautiful book on other than Tai Ran Su and all. Tai Ran Su are all textbook material for teaching, but you may not be able to. Even Mark J. Mado is a very good book.
Yeah.
But that is for process. But if you want to look at the design aspects, you have to actually integrate the mechanical and electrical properties. I have very recently found a textbook. If you drop me an email, I will definitely send you the link of that textbook.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
And ma'am, sorry, one more question I have, ma'am.
Yes.
Actually, using simulation tool, we are able to find out the force responses or displacement, these things. So is there any possibility to find out the weight of the micro cantilever or the weight of any other MEMS structures, ma'am, using simulation? Is it possible, ma'am?
Simulation, I am not that familiar with the tools actually. What I have seen in papers is that, based on my knowledge, in a simulation structure you actually define LHW, and you also define the density of the material is defined. You know the volume of the material. Volume by density, you get the mass of the material.
Or theoretically we can find out.
Yes, yes, that is how, because it's a simulation, your length WH are not going to vary. Whereas in an experimental structure, because of the undercutting, under H, etc., your calculation and the real experimental value will not match. Whereas in the simulation, whatever value of the density you put and LWH, you can just multiply volume by density, you get the mass.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks a lot for a nice presentation. Thank you.
Yes. You can just raise your hand so that we can unmute you. Ma'am, one more question from participant side. What
Yes,
are the widely used biomedical applications of MEMS in particular?
There are many in biomedical, pH sensors are there, what is that, sugar, glucose sensing, then DNA sensing, a lot of applications are there. I may not be able to choose a particular one, but people use for, numerous applications. pH, sugar, I mean, all are there.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Any other questions from participant side?
Yes, ma'am.
Merisha Fernando. Ma'am, you can just ask us. Just raise your hands only, then we can unmute you. Merisha. Merisha. Merisha, you unmuted. Nancy, I think she has got some problem.
Yes, ma'am. But
Shall
actually, we have got one more question, ma'am, by Ms.
Yes.
Monisha. What are the widely used biomedical applications?
I asked.
Yeah, that is the one more question. Okay, ma'am. Many are asking to share mail ID of Prinsu ma'am's mail ID.
Yes, ma'am. B. Kailath at IIITDM.ac.in.
You post that in chat box, ma'am.
I'll just.
Yes, ma'am.
So please note my email ID. It is there in our website also.
Merisha has got a question. What is the H rate and selectivity? What is H rate and selectivity?
Okay. So H rate actually, you want to see the meaning of H rate, okay? Which means that if you drop a sample inside a chemical, how many micrometers or how many nanometers of that material will get etched in certain seconds or certain minutes. So sometimes the unit may be micrometer per minute. Sometimes the unit may be nanometer per second. It depends upon the chemical that you use and depends upon the material that you etch. So that is the meaning of H rate. Now selectivity means that suppose you want to realize a rectangular structure of a groove of say 20 by 20 micrometer, which means that you have to have a lateral etching and a vertical etching at the same range, say 20 by 20 with a depth of 20, assume. So if you have an equal etching laterally as well as deep down, vertically down, you will get an etch rate, uniform cutting or uniform opening all the sides or all the dimensions. Whereas the lateral etching dimension and the vertical etching dimensions are different, then suppose you want to realize 20 by 20 by 10, then the selectivity actually matters. So one has to actually, repeatedly use the etching and find what is the side etching, what is the vertical etching. And then you need to limit your etching, the chemical, the temperature, the concentration, molarity of the chemical that is used for etching, current that is passed if it is electrochemical, etc. Did I answer your question? I am not sure. Is that what you wanted to know?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. She has asked only what is H rate and selectivity, and you gave the right answer.
Okay.
Okay. One more question, ma'am. Can we get problem ideas for research in this theory of MEMS? This is a question from the participant.
I didn't get you, ma'am. Research
Can we
ideas
get?
in
Yeah, yes.
research ideas in MEMS. As I at the beginning I told, I am not somebody working in MEMS, but you can see enormous requirement of sensors anywhere you see. Say you may not be able to call it as a real MEMS, but you have for a paralytic person you can create and say these are all big ideas, but say electronic nose or artificial retina or what do you say the movement sensors, actuators which can actually stimulate the hand movement for a paralyzed person, or the visually impaired, or the hearing impaired. All those people, you have enormous application, but only thing you should have developed an idea. Then that idea should be workable. Then you have to start simulating it. Once you formulate the idea into a good a flow, you have to simulate it, and simulation you should get an expected result, and then you should think about how to convert into a product. So it's like a long process. Normally MEMS require interdisciplinary ideas and interdisciplinary people working together, because no MEMS device work in a single area. So if it is an optical device, you may need physicist help. If it is a mechanical device, you may need mechanical engineering help. If it is a biosensor, you may need chemical engineering help or biology specialist help, etc. So the 2-3 people sit together, discuss and come up with a good sensor, then have a good literature review. And I think that is the best way to proceed in MEMS. Individually, if you think, you may get ideas, but whether that ideas are workable, it's important to verify that also.
Do we have any textbook, especially for this analytical research in MEMS? The next questions.
Yes. Actually, is not in this system. That is what, ma'am, I said. Maybe I will send you that textbook. I recently found a very good book. This is this has actually giving lot of equations related to MEMS. Even Tai Ransu don't have that. Mark J. Maddow don't have that. But this book, that is not in this system which I am using now. So I am not able to recollect the book name. I will send an email to you. You may share with the others.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. One last question. Why is chemical wet etching isotropic in most of the case?
Chemical wet etching is not isotropic. Chemical wet etching is anisotropic in silicon. It depends upon the crystallographic property of the material. It only depends upon that. For silicon, if you say for a crystallographic structure, even if the top layer is 100, at different angle, if you look at the structure, you have 110, 111 orientation. And the number of atoms in 100 is not same as 110, not same as 111. So when you etch, because the number of atoms in the 111 plane is more, it is difficult to remove those atoms. The etching will stop at the 111 plane. That is why you get the 54.27 angle when you etch it. So it creates this. Whereas if you have isotropic crystallographic structure, which is very, very rare in single crystalline structures. Okay, single crystalline structures always have a traditional 100, 110, 111 orientation. They all will be anisotropic in nature. Only crystal structures which are isotropic in all the 3 dimensions or all the 9 dimensions, then only you will have isotropic behavior in wet chemical etching.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful session. Nancy, I think we can close the session formally.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Okay, ma'am. With that, we have come to the end of this question and answer session. Thank you so much, Binsu, ma'am, for sparing your valuable time with us. Do you have anything else to share with us, ma'am?
No, but this is a very nice program, ma'am. You have support from some software industry also for the tool, or you are doing yourself everything? No, are you having, because I saw that this is a certification course.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
So you are actually doing the training in the software also for simulation, or only
Yes,
your,
ma'am.
yeah,
Yes, ma'am. We are going to try with IntelliCert,
yeah.
and if time permits, we are going to check with Council also.
Okay, okay. That is what I asked, because
Yes, ma'am.
unless people get familiarized with a little bit of tool, going through all lecture sessions will be, will not be that interesting, and will not be motivating for them. So I think, ma'am, this is a very wonderful, initiative that you have taken, that you are giving a certification, and that will be helpful for them in their research career ahead. So,
Thank you so
yeah,
much, ma'am.
and thank you very much for this opportunity. Anyway, my association with the Savita is quite long, so I am so thankful that even though I am not a MEMS researcher, you found me suitable for this and invited me. Thank you for that.
Yes, for that we have to thank Mrs. Pushpalata for department. She's our
Yeah,
friend, and
no,
she.
we were colleagues during my PhD. She was doing MTech, so we worked in the same lab.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for that.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Bye.
much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and for joining with us today. Hope your session would have been useful to many, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, ma'am. We thank all the participants for joining with us today. Hope you all would have gained knowledge about MEMS and nanotechnology and would have been benefited by this session. So most of your questions are also answered by our guest today. So today being the very first day of our course, we started the session a little bit 10 minutes late because of some issues. Sorry for the inconvenience. We assure that from tomorrow, we will start the session on time and request the participants to join us on time using the same Zoom link ID or password. Okay, it's a recurring link, so the participants can use the same link to join for all our upcoming sessions. Our upcoming session is on Materials for MEMS by Ms. Ritu Das, Project Associate, Material Science Research Center, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, scheduled on June 23rd, tomorrow, from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. I request all the faculties and the students to attend the session and get benefited. Learning never exhausts the mind, so enjoy this course and extend your fullest cooperation. Thank you, participants. And one more announcement is the link for today's quiz will be posted in our WhatsApp group. So
Yeah,
we
it is
request all the
posted.
participants to kindly.
Nancy, it is posted in this group also. They can do
Oh,
it.
okay, ma'am. Thank you. So participants can view this link in which is posted in our chat box. So you can use this link and finish off the quiz of today's session before joining us tomorrow. So this is a kind request from our side. So
And
meet you all in our next session.
joining the classroom is mandatory.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. We request all the participants to join in our Google Classroom too. So meet you all in our next session. Thank you all for your wonderful participation and stay safe.